Now, with lots of the lectures that we've been doing, we've been looking at major events in history. And some of you may ask why we looked at Darien and how is that a major event in history if it only affected the Scots. But when we looked at Darien, it did affect the whole nation. It did affect that sense of becoming one kingdom and all the rest of it, and looking at the futility of creating colonies and so on and so on. So that's why we did Darien. This one, the Battle of TOWTON, why pick on the battle, and why is the Battle of TOWTON a very important moment in history? And those headlines answer that very question of mine. The bloodiest battle in history. Well, it was quite a bloody battle in history, to be honest with you. It's not the bloodiest battle in history, but it's up there. And in regards to British history, it is the bloodiest battle in our history. And what we're going to do, some of the things that I will mention in connection with TOWTON, the 29th of March in the year 1461, will conflict with this press release. And we'll tell you which ones do conflict. But let's start. So TOWTON was the site of the bloodiest battle in British history. On a snowy Palm Sunday, the 29th of March, 1461, 100,000 men and some women gathered close to Tadcaster with the intention of killing one another. Now, to be honest with you, that sounds a bit brash. That sounds a bit over-exaggerated, and that sounds as if it's somebody writing a news article. But for once, you can actually say that that's not far off it. These people were at TOWTON to kill each other. The Yorkists wanted revenge for the death of the Duke of York, and the Lancastrians wanted once and for all to prove that their Lancastrian king, Henry, should remain on the throne and rule over all of England and Wales. The battle itself went badly for the Lancastrians, but it didn't go too brilliantly for the Yorkists. What we do have is conflicting figures of how many died on the battlefield, between 20 and 30,000. But if you want to compare that with the first day of the Battle of the Somme, if you look at the first day of the Battle of the Somme, 10,000 people dead, and you've got 20 to 30,000 dead at TOWTON, it makes TOWTON quite a bloody battle. The Wars of the Roses in the article, as it says, had rumbled on for many years, and after they had concluded by 1485 with the death of Richard III, we would say that the War of the Roses lasted nearly 100 years. This was a war of two dynasties. And if any of you have seen Game of Thrones, the books written that accompany the series Game of Thrones are actually, some believe, based on the War of the Roses, two ruling families that would do anything to wipe out each other, would do anything to have one of their members of their family ruling over Britain, England, Wales. Got to be very careful with that word British at this stage. But this was not a moment to settle it. 1461 only perpetuated the need for the Lancastrians and the Yorkists to further kill each other for another 24 years. I will instantly say that what we know about Richard III, again, is brought into the limelight. He's a famous king, isn't he, Richard III? But Richard III was a Yorkist king who decided that after 20 years, the bodies from the Battle of TOWTON were to be removed from the battle and buried with honours. So, you know, that paints another side to this king that people don't have a tendency to like, but he had a side to honour those that he'd fought in battle. On one side were the Lancastrians, on the other side, the Yorkists. The Lancastrians in the north, on the north side of the battlefield, the Yorkists on the south side of the battlefield. Strangely enough, the Lancastrians marched from York to meet the Yorkists. What am I blithering on about? How can you call, how can you say that the Yorkists were coming from the south and the Lancastrians coming from York? This was in Yorkshire after all. The point is that the word Lancastrian and the word Yorkists is associated with those counties, but is also associated with a north-south divide, also associated with brother fighting brother, associated with one side fighting another. This is what the war is about. It's not just about a group of people from Lancaster and a group of people from York. It's about all those people across the whole of England and Wales. Not county against county. The Lancastrian forces of Henry VI up against the Yorkists. The Yorkists were led by the future king. After that moment, it was going to be Edward IV. When you think about the figure 28,000, you think, well, that doesn't sound a lot, really. You know, First World War, Western Front, 8 million dead. But when you think about 28,000 individuals dying over a field of battle, only one only 1 mile in length, 1 mile in length, 28, 30,000, or whatever number it is, individuals dead. If you compare that with the Somme, the front of the Somme is over 10 miles in length. So when you think about that, you know, that's less than 1,000 dead per mile. At TOWTON, it's between 20 and 30,000 dead for that 1 mile. This is a moment where you have to look at the futility of warfare. And I know some of you have already read what's on the screen, which is not a bad thing sometimes, but it is a bad thing with me. Because this battle itself is the epitome of all battles. Even when you go to the battle site of Islandawana from 1879, you find very little in the regards to human remains. The rocky conditions, the acids in the soil and so on have rotted away lots of the human remains from Islandawana. If you look, for example, at other battlefields, if you want to look at Hastings, for example, I can't say that one single body has been found associated with the Battle of Hastings. Bosworth, look at the Battle of St. Fagans. We're told by the historians that thousands of royalists were butchered after the battle. Who wrote the history? And secondly, where are the bodies? So did the Battle of TOWTON actually exist? You know, is it just made up? Is it just fantasy? Well, these bodies in front of you on this image are not. Oh no, we've changed screen anyway. The image that we started off with was a load of bodies in a trench. Well, that's actually from another battle. The ones at TOWTON were tossed into a ditch or a pit dug into the ground, but they were lucky to be buried in the first place. I have said immediately that we've got archaeological evidence for the Battle of TOWTON. We've got bodies from the Battle of TOWTON. We know how people died at the Battle of TOWTON. It corroborates the historical record. We know, for example, that the bodies were stripped of all their belongings, those that are buried after the battle, and everyone is buried after the battle. We've got archaeological evidence of not 40, but 50 individuals from the Battle of TOWTON excavated between 1996 and 1997. So we've got, and these are buried when there was an extension to the TOWTON Hall. And these bodies themselves eke out the descriptions from the battle. You know, people are just bludgeoning each other to death. You know, people are being poleaxed, halberds being forced through people being bludgeoned to death on the ground, and so on and so on. That could be complete fantasy, but it's not. The 50 bodies that we see associated with TOWTON, I know that's 50 out of, you know, tens of thousands, but albeit that most of the bodies at TOWTON were left on the battlefield and then collected and put in a charnel pit somewhere. The bodies that we will look at, the individuals that this lecture is about, those bodies themselves were buried, 50 of them in a mass grave, and they were people who were chosen from the battlefield to be buried. What happened to their skulls whilst these people were still alive and fighting is in this lecture. What we have in front of us on the screen is a cannonball it says that this is a bullet. Well, you know, this is not from a hand cannon. This is from a proper piece of ordnance on the battlefield. We know that the ordnance on the battlefield was really poor ordnance. We've got evidence of cannons exploding on the battlefield. The cannons on the battlefield killed more of the people that were firing the cannons than actually of the enemy. So that's what that image is in front of us. That's a cannon shot, a cannonball, small cannonball, but that's not classed as a bullet. And then we look at what the archaeologist Tim Sutherland at Bradford University thought when he found these bodies. When I first saw them, I was absolutely stunned. I would be gobsmacked. A whole grave pit full of skeletons, but they weren't just any skeletons. They weren't from, you know, they weren't cholera deaths. These weren't plague deaths. They weren't people who all happened to die at the same day. These themselves were individuals that died on the 29th of March, 1461. And the sentence here, on that day, these people went through hell. Now, the history tells us that, but he's seeing that that is fact. That's not historical fiction, that's archaeological fact. So when you see the series Great Game of Thrones and people being bludgeoned to death, don't think of that based on fantasy. It's based on not only historical fact, but archaeological fact. Very important point there. The archaeologist goes on to say, I feel as though I can almost touch the history. I would say be the history, see it, connect with the history, connect with those historical lines to make the archaeology speak, make those jaws issue words that we could only dream of before. It's something that the more you get to know about the Battle of Towton, the more you realize it wasn't just any old medieval battle. It was a very significant event. That's why we're doing it today. Some of the skeletons showed evidence of up to 20 head injuries. Now, you know, usually if you're poleaxed, you know, that's going to kill you instantly. But as people being poleaxed, basically, we will look at what a poleaxe is. There are various different descriptions, but the poleaxes that they used at that time, you would have had a long wooden shaft, and on the end you would have had a metal piece, and that metal piece would have had a very large spike to it, very long metal spike leading off to it. And then just before that, on the one side you would have a very sharp spike. On the other side, you'd have what looked like an axe. So the whole point is to hold the poleaxe, to poleaxe somebody with a spike in through their temple, and as they're going down, get that other spike on the bar, smash that into their skull, and then turn the tool around, and then whip that as an axe into their skull. I will demonstrate that in a short while. So this is why we see lots of the skulls having these multiple injuries. They all died a horrible death, and some of the skeletal remains have been extensively studied to assist us in understanding what the historical context is. An archaeologist from Bradford University, a paleopathologist, commented, the thing that shook us was that these people had been butchered. They had been butchered as they stood, and as they were butchered on the ground, and as they were butchered after the battle as well, the level of hatred. However, if you can imagine the scenes on the battlefield, just sort of close your eyes a moment. Just sort of close your eyes, everybody. Just think, you are a Lancastrian. You are charging into the midst of the Yorkists. The Yorkists are defending. And then suddenly you panic. As a Lancastrian, you run then into your own ranks. The Lancastrians that you are fighting for do not know whether you're your friend or foe. You see the same treatment that the Lancastrians are giving the Yorkists. In other words, brother kills brother. Nobody knows on which side you are on. If you're facing one side, you're on one side, and if you're facing the other side, you're on the other side. That's the only differentiation. If you're retreating back into your own ranks, you're going to end up dead anyway. So it was pointless retreating in the first place. This is the type of battle we're talking about. We're not talking about people in uniforms with swastikas and the other side are set out in normal British Army issue uniforms. You're able to work out that the guy with death caps on his collar are actually German, and the other person you know is actually a Brit, for example. You don't have that differentiation. You have no idea who's who on the battlefield. You could be mutilating a guy who had fought alongside you before because you would not know Eve from Adam. So the pathologist, the paleopathologist, the thing that shook us was these people had been butchered. Again, I've read that line twice. I think the archaeologist was actually quite shocked that the historical record was accurate. You know, you could think, oh, well, that's what happened at TOWTON. I don't think people believed it. I really don't. The main thing is the sheer number of head injuries. Perhaps the most spectacular ones are where people have basically had had part of their head sliced off, or their head cut in half. We've got evidence in the bones of ears and noses being cut off. Mutilation whilst people were still alive, and mutilation while people were dead. Somebody asked me, they said, oh, that line's a bit of nonsense, isn't it? That noses and ears were cut off. That's nonsense. How can you cut somebody's ears off and a nose off when they're wearing a helmet? Well, you know, the point is, when you're in this type of battle, an armor-piercing arrow is going to penetrate your helmet anyway. If somebody hits you with a sword at close range, it's going to go through your helmet anyway. The problem is wearing a helmet. If you look at me, this is the vision that you've got. You can't see what's on the right of you, and you can't see what's on the left of you. So if there's anybody coming from you at the right, you can't see. If there's anyone coming from you at the left, you can't see. So it's best not to wear a helmet. So it's very likely that most of those on the battlefield would have discarded their helmets in the first place because they were just cumbersome. You can't really move with a helmet on. Carrying on, evidence of the killing, the combat is still bubbling out of the ground, even to today. Now, this article itself is written 10 years ago. So 40 years on, people are still detecting and reporting their findings on the battlefield. This is a project that metal detecting enthusiasts and archaeologists work together in recording what they've got. If anyone know of the series, and I know you will, Keith, Two Men in a Trench, you'll know that Neil Oliver became a star that day when he was in that series. And there was also a Julian Pollard as well, both of them doctors, and both of them were in the series, and both of them showed surprise with what they were finding at the battlefield sites in Britain, and also with the battlefield site at TOWTON. You got a sense of surprise. You got a sense of disbelievement when you're looking at the archaeological record there. Again, this article, it goes to say it would have been intense. It would have been noisy. It would have been fearful. It would have been horrific. 28,000 men to die within 12 hours is a huge number. Can I describe a little bit more of that picture?
Yeah.
You've got soldiers who haven't eaten or drunk in 12 hours. You've got soldiers that are absolutely exhausted. You'd have had soldiers that would have defecated and urinated on the field as they stood. You would have had soldiers on the battlefield writhing in agony in their own shit. This is the type of battle that you're talking about. You're talking about a battle that turned into a complete quagmire. You're talking about the Lancastrians being rained into their faces. Horizontal rain, the description is. We all know horizontal rain is not pleasant at the best of times, but when you're fighting, when you're unable to yield your weapons because your hands are basically freezing cold, you've got snow into your eyes as well. You've got arrows raining down on you for a period of 12 hours. This is what the battle was about. The Lancastrians commanded the hill. But unfortunately, the Lancastrians had the worst of the weather in the faces. The wind blowing snow up their nostrils, blowing snow into their lungs. These were people who did not want to be there. The casualty rate on the battlefield is about 8,000 Yorkists and about 20,000 Lancastrians. This is, and the futility, well, another 25 years, and Henry Tudor would come over, the Welsh traitor, and he would take the throne for himself, eradicating the Lancastrian and Yorkists families overnight. And the reason why I call him the Welsh traitor is he did nothing for Wales, and eventually we see the Tudors banning the use of the Welsh language. But anyway, sorry to get political. There are few when we see this, you know, there are few battles that bring into this comparison. If you compare the battle itself with the first day of the Somme, 10,000 British casualties, to then at this period you got about 30,000 in one day. So you know you got 10,000 British casualties in the Battle of Somme. That first day you got up to 30 at TOWTON. And obviously there's a long field of battle, as I said, at the Somme. You can only imagine what the melee was like, the man-to-man cut and thrust. The battle was so intense that at times the bodies piled up so high that the opposing sides would say to each other, stop! Let's move these bodies out of the way and then let's get back to it. I think that might be Hollywood, but then again, I'm thinking, hang on a minute, how would they continue if there's a pile of bodies in front of them anyway? This is like the battlefields in the First World War, the Somme, where you've got the machine guns of Spandau opening it up, and people are being mowed down, and they're piling up at just outside the trenches at the Somme, or Ypres, or Passchendaele, or anywhere like that. And you're thinking, well, in that situation, bodies were removed from the field in the First World War, and maybe you could think about the same with TOWTON. It may sound ridiculous, but let's go with that. There are a few regulations protecting the battlefield, but we've got local community archaeologists and metal detectorists working together and saying, right, we need to understand this battle a lot more. So again, I'm going to make that comparison with Waterloo. Keith said the other week that when you look at Waterloo, they're getting evidence from Waterloo that there were other actions at Waterloo that we know nothing about. When in fact, Waterloo has got to be the most archived, the most written about, documented battles in history. And we're still learning new things out about Waterloo. This is a battle that occurred 450 odd years before Waterloo. And you're looking at this and thinking, well, you know, this battle itself, we could still have so much to learn from it. This is why people are going out metal detecting, finding more. And I've realized it's more like 350 years earlier, not 450. But anyway, and the first act of remembrance in regards to this battlefield was that they cast 3 new bells for All Saints Church at Saxton. And these bells would ring out even today. And the other memorial is that we've got a memorial on the field, basically saying this was the site of the Battle of TOWTON. There's a memorial there, and we've got the wonderful act of Richard III burying the hatchet and saying, well, I'm now king, we need to bury some of the dead at that battle. And those people have been lying there for 20 years. And we do have a person who joined, who is involved in our class today, called Chris Saxton. I wonder if that's the right spelling, isn't it, Keith?
Sorry, say that again.
Saxton. So we've got 3 bells.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yep. We got 3 bells, which is a village which is just south of TOWTON, Saxton, and they've got 3 bells being cast there. I wonder if that's where Chris Saxton's family actually comes from.
Yeah, family history. Yeah, you never know.
You never know. You never know. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back. We're going to do a new little bit of a screen share. We're going to go back to those bodies that we started out with. And here we go. You should be seeing those bodies on your screen.
Yep.
Now, those bodies there are nothing like the bodies that we see at TOWTON. They're organized. They're in rows. The ones at TOWTON, the 50-odd bodies are just chucked in the pit. And this is one of them. Now, this individual has a nasal injury, probably because he was frontally poleaxed directly into his face. But this is not one of the over-exaggerated injuries that we actually see in regards to the skeletal remains that we see at TOWTON. And I use the word over-exaggerated. You would think the damage to the skulls at TOWTON are Hollywood, but they are not. So going back to the excavations in 1996, 1997, it was thought that it could initially be thought that, you know, these are a load of cholera victims or something, or plague. But immediately, as they started seeing their head wounds, they thought, right, that square hole in a skull, that's from a medieval weapon. And that smaller hole in the skull, that's from a medieval armor-piercing bodkin. So we've got all these different things. Immediately, they realized it wasn't guesswork. They had the archaeology to tell the story. We haven't had many questions this week, but we've had various odd questions. And one of the other odd questions was that were there any women involved in the battle? Well, we've got no references to women being on the battle, but the answer is yes. When the Lancastrians were on the hill, the northern hill overlooking the Yorkists, immediately you'd think the people on the high ground that were going to win the battle, they made the same mistake as those at the Battle of Hastings, which we'll go on to. But there would have been women with their husbands, you know, the knights and the lords on the battlefield. And as they would see their husbands die on the battlefield, the women would undoubtedly arm themselves to defend themselves. There was nobody interested in raping them on the battlefield. They were interested in killing these women because no quarter was given. It was decided at the beginning of the battle. You can imagine 2 men in the center of the battlefield. Lancastrian says to the Yorkist, we are going to give no quarter. And the Yorkists, with a big smile on their faces, say, we are going to give no quarter. And no quarter was given. None of the Lancastrian knights were allowed to live. None of the Lancastrian lords were allowed to live either if they were captured. Nobody was allowed to live. There was no lords and ladies taken for hostages. They were butchered on the battlefield. This was real hatred. You do unto us that we now do unto you. As my brother used to say, if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. That paints the picture. What I'd like to do is actually show you, go through all these images just briefly, just slowly. What I'd like to do is show you where we are. That's where we are, TOWTON. Now, over the period of the War of the Roses, there's about 10 major battles. You've got a few marked on, you know, your Mortimer's Cross. You've got St. Albans. These are in the south. You've got the ones, some of the ones in the north, TOWTON and Wakefield. As you can appreciate straight away, this is about north and south. This is about east and west. This is about one side fighting another. This is the epitome of the futility, again, of the British Civil War that would take place in the 1640s. So the Battle of TOWTON is 4 kilometers to the south of the market town Tadcaster. The battle didn't take place directly at TOWTON, like most of these battles. They took place just outside a village or a town, and then they were given the name. For example, the Battle of Tewkesbury actually took place outside Tewkesbury. The retreat was through Tewkesbury. And then when you look at the likes of TOWTON is similar. You look at the likes of Culloden, all these places are associated with a nearby village. Most of them never ever took place in that locality. Battle of Hastings is a good example of that, 14th of October 1066. It's a brilliant example where we don't really know where the battle was. We haven't found any bones, any of the ordnance really. So we can't really say where the battle is. We've got to go with descriptions. But we don't go with just descriptions about TOWTON. We have so much, my French, bloody archaeological evidence. And this is 18 kilometers southwest of the city of York. The Lancastrians are marching from York. That confuses people. So this itself is to decide the crown. This was meant. You've heard this before. This was the battle to end all wars. It never is the case. It did not end the war. But it sees us see the archaeology as the only really properly recorded piece of archaeology in regards to battles in Britain. This decides the future in a way. So by the time Richard is facing the army of the Tudors at the Battle of Bosworth, August 1485, the lots of his sort of lots of the fighting men that he could have used, lots of the allies that he could have used on that battle were gone because they'd killed each other. They had equally exterminated each other. So Richard III was a bit weaker on that battlefield than he could have been if this was decided that day. And there would have been no Tudor invasion. History would have been completely different. There would have been no Queen Elizabeth. There would have been no Henry VIII. There would have been no dissolution of the monasteries. History would have been very different. But it was decided that day. This changed history. And that's why we eventually see the Tudors on the throne of England, Wales. We have not gone down too much of a diatribe, but one thing I will say that we could talk much more about the history, but I'm not going to. I can't really be asked because the archaeology, I'm an archaeologist, and there's lots more to say in the archaeology than the history. We will dabble a little bit more into the history, but what I'm saying, we've got a lot more bones today. So secondary historical documents, mainly from the 1718 and 1900s. From writers I've not really heard of. There's one here, Ledman in 1891. You may have come across him. So all these writers throughout those years are gelling into the Battle of TOWTON folklore. You know, legends. You know, people drowning in the river and the bodies then pile up in the river, and then the retreating Lancastrians run across the bodies of their once esteemed colleagues. And you talk about people being hacked to death and all these things. These are placed into the legends of folklore, but the archaeology bears out those legends and folklores to be archaeological fact. So these 50 individuals, lots of them radiocarbon dated in 2000. This is the most tangible evidence for the battle, any battle that we know of in Britain. And there was a few unusual questions. I like to get these out. This is why we do the lecture at other times of the week as well. So this next line it says, on the skulls, the detailed analysis of the excavated material reveal that all individuals were males, out of the 50 there, who had suffered extensive trauma inflicted by swords, knives, bills, the poleaxes, and bill hooks and so on. War hammers as well. People actually had big hammers on, smashing people's skulls in. And obviously we've now got the published results, and we've now got the TV series and so on. And somebody then asked me, they said, Karl, I'm not sure about two things. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, we talk about the battle, and we talk about all these objects that were used to kill these individuals, looking at the damage to the skulls and the long bones and so on. Yeah, And I said, well, where are those weapons? You know, why haven't these tens of thousands of weapons actually survived? And I said, well, they've been melted down. They've been lost. They've been damaged. That's what's happened. You don't usually find whole swords, and they've rotted away. And I said, okay, fair enough. And then somebody asked the question. They said, well, you talk about the people that were injured on the battlefield. They would have died anyway. You know, where are they buried? And I said, well, why would they have died anyway? And they said, well, you know, you're not going to survive any injury from a battle. And I said, yes, you are. And they say, you can't say that. And I said, yes, I can say that, because we've got one skull from this battle. The person had a wound 10 years earlier and it healed, which you would think if infection got in there, gangrene, he would instantly die. But people survived back then. And then because they were aware of infection, they were aware of gangrene. And then I get the argument, well, no, they weren't. They didn't know anything about bacteria and so on. So how did they survive these wounds in the first place? Do you know what I mean? So you can learn a lot from this evidence. I don't believe for one minute the statement they didn't know anything about bacteria and germs and all the rest of it. Of course they did. They just had different words for it. Following on from these initial findings, it was decided to start extensive landscape surveys, which they've been doing, to eke in. So what they did, they've now found some of the weapons that directly link in with damage caused to these bones. The landscape today is very, very different. It is very, very different. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my images again. We know where this is now anyway. So, and nice of you to join us, Jane. So we've got that one. And what we've got, we'll come back to that now. Look at that one, that person's been poleaxed. And what I'm going to do is get a weapon. Stay there. Right, Keith, can you see me standing with this weapon?
I can in the little picture on the side, yeah.
Yeah, so basically what you're talking with when you poleaxe somebody, right? So you're going to hold it like that. You're going to go towards the enemy, right? And there's going to be a big spike on the end, and you're going to try and force that either between some of their armor on the chest, or the best thing to do is go directly into their skull. Now the point is that there would be thick ranks of Lancastrians, or there'd be thick ranks of Yorkists if you're hitting from the other side. So if you manage to get that into their skull, the person instantly you're going to be shocking their temporal lobe, and they're going to be disorientated. And if that hasn't instantly killed them, they're going to be starting to stagger. And as they're starting to stagger, as long as you've got somebody defending the right of you, you get the other side of the poleaxe, and that's going to have a sharp spike. And you smash that into their skull. And as they're going down onto the ground and there's confusion in the enemy ranks, you take the axe and you smash in their skull. And this is all done within seconds. Was that a good demonstration, Keith?
Yes, I think you've obviously tried that before.
Well, I haven't seen Michelle for weeks. Yeah, I haven't seen Michelle for weeks.
That's a normal night on Barry.
Yeah, it is. Never park your car in Barry, by the way. So what we've got in regards to these skulls, much of what we do find from the landscape survey, much of what we do find from the amalgam of archaeology, history, metal detecting, pathology, and so on, has all gleamed together. But when we do look at the landscape, the field boundaries that existed then no longer exist today. Even the course of the rivers changed. But the big things that stand out is the big hillock where the Lancastrian army was on. We know that that's there. The big problem that we have found is that those bodies that were left on the battlefield, those bodies, bits of bones that weren't collected, because I'm sure Richard III wouldn't have expected every tooth to have been recovered. That would have been ridiculous. But all those bones that actually remained there, and all those bits of chainmail, broken swords, even bits of the the pole staff itself, all those things would have gone into the ground. So those are the things we're looking for. Maps, aerial photography, LiDAR, field walking, all these different things have come into play when you look at the bodies on that battlefield. Now, this is akin to what the archaeologists were seeing. Bodies upon bodies. I've got to get my glasses on with this one. So what we're talking about instantly, if you're an archaeologist working at this site, the first thing that you can see that is so obvious on this image, for example, is that individual there actually has a square slot into their hull, into their skull. So that would give you an impression that these are no normal individuals. The other thing with the higgledy-piggledy is these were buried in haste, right? So buried in haste, they were probably removed from the battlefield straight away. And the reason why I'm saying that, if you're talking about radial cranial damage to the skull, so basically you've got shock and the skull starts to go into bits. If you leave a skull like that into a point of full decomposition, you're not going to be able to collect all the bits of skull. So the evidence tells us that these bodies were buried more or less straight after the battle, after being stripped. Some archaeologists would argue that these were Lancastrians, others Yorkists. I say everybody. Nobody's going to know who these people are after they're dead, unless there's a little tag on them saying, I am a Lancastrian, which is highly unlikely. And don't ever make the mistake, the mistake that I used to make. I used to think that the Yorkists wore red roses and the Lancastrians used to wear white. It's the other way round. The Yorkists are the white roses and the Lancastrians are the reds.
Theoretically.
Theoretically, yes. Yeah, in theory, you can imagine. Yeah, you can see this now, can't you, Keith? I'm with the Lancastrians. I've got my shield has got a red crest on it, right? And people are going to think, well, which side are you from? Because so colour's going to mean nothing, right? And that's a really good point. You're not going to be able to differentiate who's who at all.
I think it was Shakespeare who invented that, actually.
What about the colours?
Yeah, about the red and white roses, yeah.
Shakespeare does actually come into this. And yeah, this is, you know, when we come across the white and the red roses, I remember giving a lecture on this and I said, look, the red and the white rose representing the Plantagenets, and somebody saying actually the red and the white rose represents the Tudors, and you start to go into the field that I don't think anyone knows the hell what's going on with this whole situation. The fact of the matter is it's one house that has these values and it's another house that has those values. And I think that's more close to the point than anything. Now, I remember giving the lecture on Monday and I said, I remember saying, oh, which army do these people represent? And the answer was saying, obviously, the guy on the horse, these have definitely got to be Yorkists. Why? Because, and then somebody said they've got to definitely be Lancastrians because there's red. Oh no, but these have got to be Yorkists because there's a white cross on there. And then you actually come into the dilemma. That guy on the right has a red tunic, and then you start to get into the confusion. The interesting thing is, this is quite a nice little image. There would have been snow on the ground that day, but as we know, with examples such as the Battle of Waterloo, such as the Somme in the winter months, we know that any snow or water coming down was not good for the battle. Everything would have been slushed up. Everything would have got boggy. Your cavalry wouldn't have been able to move. Your infantry wouldn't have been able to move, and your artillery would have been stuck. So even though the Lancastrian, even though the Yorkists have the best of the field, well, it's quite strange that even the Yorkists are below the hill. I never often say that. The wind and the rain are behind the Yorkists. So everything they shoot up into the air is going to be hitting the Lancastrian lines. The Lancastrians don't know that their arrows are not hitting the Yorkists, but they eventually twig and then they leave the hill, which has got to be one of the worst mistakes of any military commander. Isn't that right, Keith?
I'm afraid so, yeah.
Never leave the defensive position. These are the types of weapons that they use in the armor-piercing bodkins. Now, this worked as so. So what I need to do, I need to get my artwork up there, Keith. Get ready to draw. Here we go. So what we've got here. So we've got one of the bits of chainmail there, another linking there.
You can only see the arrow at the moment.
You can only see the arrow.
Yep.
You can't see my artwork.
Maybe it's on the side, too far out. Oh, yeah, it's hidden by the pictures of people.
Get rid of the pictures of the people. Move them.
Move them. I wish I could.
Hang on, I'm going to move the pictures of people. Thanks for that, Keith. Right, are they moved over?
No.
Why are they still there? Oh, dash it, people! Why do people bother attending my lectures when I get in the way? Right, here we go. So let's do it again. Right, so let's. So you've got a link there.
Yep, I can see your round circle.
Okay, you've got another link there. So you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So the point is oh my God, that's actually quite good. You say take a photograph.
You get the point, yeah.
You get, oh, shut up. You know, I do the jokes today, not you. So what it is that as this is impacting, actually these links are a bit too big. But the point is either you have a really fine bodkin that actually can just go through the links, or you have another bodkin that's slightly larger than the links, and it rips the links open and it directly goes straight into the flesh. And as you're trying to pull the arrow out, you can't because it's being stopped by the links. So this is the whole point of these bodkins. They're armor piercing because they go through armor as well. And you can imagine that there's no protection with these if you've got flights of these coming towards you on the battlefield. The Lancastrians are going to be fair game. The bowmen are going to be able to see them on the hill, but the Lancastrians are not going to be able to see the Yorkists. So this is the point we're trying to make. The bowmen of the day were the guns of the future. You know, these were the accurate soldiers. And if you want to get into sort of some other facts and figures, were people from Wales involved in the battle? The answer is yes. Were people from Scotland involved in the battle? The answer is yes. Were people from France? Yes. Definitely from France. So this battle itself is a moment that is very, very influential. Moving on. There's the memorial, the Battle of TOWTON Memorial, Palm Sunday. You can obviously see that's a later memorial, but I'm pretty sure that Richard III had a monument established there as well to remember the dead of everyone. Richard III wanted to unify the people of Britain, not to sort of range against them. And Richard III has a really bad publicity. But then again, who writes the history? So one thing I absolutely love doing in these lectures is going back to my days where I used to get my little soldiers out. So here we go, Keith. Let's get and note the Yorkists are in red.
Right.
Okay, yeah, this is certainly impressive stuff. So there's our TOWTON, and you're thinking, well, the battle is here. So this is that wonderful hill. So what's happening is that rain upon rain of arrows are hitting these exposed soldiers on the hill. There is raining down on them, but the Lancastrians outnumber the Yorkists. So this is key. The Lancastrians outnumber the Yorkists. So to an extent, they could lose men. However, after a while, the Lancastrians have enough of this, and they think this is rather similar to what happened at the Battle of Hastings. The Lancastrians don't realize that if they kept on the hill, they may have won the battle. Very same can be said of the Battle of Hastings on the 14th of October. Very similar, because it's said that Harold had depleted the Duke of Normandy's army to such an extent that if Harold had stayed on that hill, he would have won the battle. But the same thing happened. There was like this thing, oh, we've had enough of this, right? We've had enough of being rained on by arrows. We've had enough of all these attacks, right? Let's go for it. So they attack. And what happens is that the Yorkists actually start moving forward to meet the Lancastrians, which is actually a fault of the Yorkists as well. They're all fighting in this boggy ground now known as Bloody Meadow, which at this point is very bloody and very boggy. The attack of the Lancastrian cavalry failed because they couldn't cope with the boggy conditions. The most of the Lancastrian cavalry would have survived the battle because they were on horse and they would have been able to get away. What's happening next is what changes the battle. We'll go on to that. But at this point, the Lancastrians were now starting to win the battle. They were winning the battle. And you forget to realize things might go wrong. So in other words, the entire Lancastrian army is leaving the hill, meaning that if the Yorkists their luck starts to change on the battle, they will be able to advance, take you by surprise, and then you're going to retreat. And later on, we will see what happened. And that river itself is known as the Cockbeck. And the Cockbeck was actually so choked with bodies, as I've said, that the Lancastrians were able to run across the river. So, going back to my little chart, let's go back to the little mouse and let's move on a bit. So you can get an idea of the terrain. In fact, this was, the Lancastrians were in a perfect position, even if it was snow and rain. And there you can see the word Saxton, the village of Saxton, or the town of Saxton. So I think what we're going to do, we will go on a little bit further, but there's a point that I'd like to make back to what I said earlier on. The point is the point of the sword. Now, this guy, you can see there's a gash. And that gash itself is being done in a previous battle, right? And there you go, his face itself, he looks a bit like reconstructions that I've seen of Julius Caesar. This guy was about 50 when he was on the battlefield, but his jaw recovered, his bone healed, only to be killed at the Battle of TOWTON. We don't know who this individual was at all, but what we do know is that on the battle, his face was completely smashed in. And this is an experienced soldier that lost his life on the battlefield. The wound itself, that again you can clearly see, would have healed 10 years earlier. So what we're going to do, we will move on a little bit more, and then I think I've just got over halfway, so I'm going to see lots of publications being written about this. Blood Red Roses, I think that's more in what you were saying. And this is a wonderful, by Richard Caton Woodville, 1800s, the Battle of TOWTON, polearms, poleaxed, that there is what I'm talking about. And actually, there's not much difference between a halberd and a poleaxe. And in fact, if you look at the meaning of a halberd and a poleaxe, you come up with the same, similar illustrations. And I've got one of the young lads in my Young Explorers class who's done an illustration of what the difference between a poleaxe and a halberd. So that you could describe as a halberd, and that was a poleaxe. So the point is, this man is trying to get an opportunity to stab him. And as soon as he's falling down, he's going to take that and he's going to penetrate his helmet. Now, the one thing you can see, that guy without a helmet, that man is best placed to defend himself now, because he's able to get a peripheral vision all the way around. He's able to see, whereas this person might be hit from the side and not know it. Where if this person is going to be hit from the side, he will know it. Somebody mentioned in one of the other lectures, is the issue of having a crossbow more effective than a longbow. Actually, a crossbow is more effective close on, but the longbow is more effective from distance. A crossbow, and that's our crossbow there. You can see that it's going to be quite effective. Now, the point is, you can imagine that this guy is retreating. How does this guy on the horse not know whether this is a Lancastrian or a Yorkist? If these are the Lancastrians on this side, that guy is going to instantly kill that guy, even though he's on the same side. And if, again, you can see the absolute madness of this battle. Again, if we just sort of labor the point as well. Which side is that man on there? Can you guess? Because I can't.
No,
I know
you can't
that
tell.
you can't tell. You can imagine that this guy might actually be that guy might actually be a Yorkist, and that guy there might be running from this bloke. He's defending himself against this attack, but there's a guy coming from behind him thinking that he's a Lancastrian and he's going to end up dead. It's mad, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Talk about friendly fire.
Yeah.
And I think there's one thing to be said after the battle. You could turn around and say after the battle, actually, I'm actually a Yorkist. How are you going to know? Because everyone's speaking the same language. You might have a guy who's speaking a Scots dialect and you're speaking a Scots dialect. One's a Lancastrian, one's a Yorkist. Yeah. Who's to say which side you're on? Mm. And this, I love this. And hopefully what we're going to do, because look at that there. Can you clearly see that, Keith?
Yep. I prefer not to, but...
I love this reconstruction. And the reason why I love this reconstruction is the description of this skull, skeleton 25. What they've done is, as they've excavated at TOWTON, they've labeled all the bodies. So the one at the bottom's 50 and the one on the top's number 1, the one that's been removed. And I can assure you that the osteologists have actually dissected this skull. And what we're going to do, we're going to go to my notes about this straight away, whilst I've got this image in front of me. And we're going to do the description. So here we go. Let me get my, let's describe this one. Terry's loving this lecture, and I know she is. So the body with some of the most severe injuries is known as TOWTON 25. TOWTON 25 got his nickname from the order in which his bones were removed from the grave. TOWTON 25, who was between 36 and 45 years old at the time of his death, sustained 8 wounds to his head. 8. Osteologists can recreate the order in which TOWTON 25 received his injuries because of the direction and pattern of his skull fractures. Can I just interject there quickly? If you've got an injury from behind, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually retreating. You could actually be advancing, and then somebody from behind who's a Yorkist might think that you're a retreating enemy. You can't win. The first 5 blows were by a bladed weapon to the left side of his face. So there we go. There's all the blows to the left side of his face. And amazingly enough, it's saying that these blows were not fatal. Now, I'm an archaeologist, not an osteologist. I'm not going to question that, but these are experts.
No, but the shock would have been pretty drastic, wouldn't it?
Yes. But apparently the person survived 5 facial wounds. The soldier sustained another blow to the back of his head that opened a large horizontal gash. Now, I'm trying to work this out, causing other radiating fractures down the base and sides of his skull. The bone fragments embedded in his brain would have likely caused his death. TOWTON 25 received another wound that cut through his face from his left eye to the right side of his jaw. So I'm thinking my chain of events. Obviously, these are the facial injuries, and then you have this final blow. And if I'm transcribing this right, when you're in agony, you tendency to roll on your face. Has that ever happened to you, Keith? You've been in pain.
I can imagine.
Yeah, you're in pain. Oh, okay then. Right. I can remember having a fight with somebody at school, them punching me in the face before I retaliate. I'm not saying what I do.
Crouching. Yeah.
So
you go into sort of like a fetus position, don't you?
That's right. But then, so that person's then able to aim to the back of your head, right? And maybe at that point the person rolled over, even though they might be dead, they've rolled over. And at the next point, you have another gash into the face. That's my translation of what's going on. This is the way I can see this going on. But no doubt, however this individual died, okay, the osteologist right, they survived those 5 blows to the face. Yeah. This person would have been in absolute shock anyway, and I don't think they were in any position at this point. They'd probably dropped their sword anyway, so they were helpless. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't have wanted to survive that anyway. Look at that. I don't think you want to survive that, and your brain's open as well. Somebody said to me, they said, "Is Ellen going to be in this lecture today?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Oh my God, look at those wonderful gnashes. Look at those wonderful teeth." And she's got a point. They are really, for somebody, my teeth. If this person's the same age as me, which is likely, my teeth are nowhere like this. Those are in really good condition. Naturally, we don't have the ranges of sugar available that were available to Elizabeth 100 years later. So this guy's eating natural sugar, so he doesn't have those sort of the sugar rotting his teeth. So I think what I am going to do now is go on to another image, and then we will have a break. Over the cock beck. And you know, when you're up in this neck of the world, people say to you, "Have you got the time on your cock?" That's what they're referring to. So this image shows them heading over the cock beck, trying to retreat. It said, even though there were bridges, the bridges collapsed with the weight of the soldiers going above them. And then they had to wade across the river. And that's all we know. If I had been in this situation as a military commander of the Lancastrians, I would have definitely tried to defend the bridges. But we don't have any of that evidence. We don't have any more information. And naturally, those Lancastrians that did leave the battle wouldn't have written that down anyway. The thing that they would have wanted to do was to flee for their lives. And you can see that scene there. You can't tell what's what again. And anyone who had a horse at that stage would have been lucky. What we're going to do, we're going to have a break now. Are there any questions?
No, not from me. No, not for me. I mean, I've just been reading a book about the American war with the Creek Indians, and one notable victory, Andrew Jackson, who was leading the American forces, in a way of telling how many Indians they'd killed, ordered that all the noses be cut off and collected so they could have an accurate count. This was in 1814. So, the idea of mutilating a body is not something, that's old particularly. And it was a way things were done. So if they wanted to do that, and they talk about mutilation of the bodies there, of ears and noses, maybe that was what they were doing back then as well.
What in a similar vein, we see after battles that people cutting people's heads off to get a count. And also we're seeing people having their right arm cut off if we look at Egyptian tombs. So yeah, I can see that. Well, yeah, cool. So all right then, let's see if there's any questions. Let's have them all on the screen. So let's Jane's ready and poised. Chris is unmuted.
Hello, Jane.
So what we'll do, we'll unmute. Other than we'll unmute Karen and Jim in a minute. Anything you'd like to say, Chris?
Yeah, all the illustrations show what I would describe as a standing army. They've all got helmets. They've all got leather jerkins. But wouldn't a lot of them not have been sort of peasants? With not so organised. Because they were coming from the ranks of the lords. I don't know.
Right. Okay. Hang on a minute. God. Some of the image that you've seen from the 1800s, the artists, they're naturally going to put everybody in armor. So naturally, that's not going to be a demonstration. When Renaissance artists are illustrating what these battles look like, they put everybody in armor. But we do know from the battle, we do know from other descriptions is that the peasants wouldn't have worn any armor at all. And to be honest with you, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't have wanted to wear armor either, because armor's going to weigh you down if you're going to retreat. Armor's not going to offer you much protection from armor-piercing bodkins anyway. So even as a noble person, I'm sure that these individuals would have realized from descriptions like Cressy and Agincourt that armor isn't very helpful in lots of these situations, and eventually armor wasn't being used in battles at all. So your point is completely correct, Chris. Is that answered that one? Yeah
Thank you.
Jane? No, Jane don't want to say anything. Goff?
Sorry, it's not a question though, just an observation. Are you there? Yeah,
we can hear you, Jane.
Yeah, we can hear
you. Just an observation that the battlefields just all look complete mess, don't they? It's a wonder, as you say, it's a wonder how the right side won or whatever, because how can you tell who you're killing? And it looks a jumbled heap. It's a wonder they ever went into battle, if that was how it was.
Most people had never been in a battle at all, so they would have never experienced this. And when they were in the battle situation, they then realised. With if you want to compare this with the Battle of Sedgemoor in 1685, the Battle of Sedgemoor. With the Battle of Sedgemoor, you had a lot of peasants, and the peasants. The peasants, as soon as they were opened up upon by the royalist forces, just scattered. And those that were left on the field didn't have a clue what they were doing. They weren't able to defend themselves because they were in complete shock. These people on that field would have been in complete shock. Even after a few moments, you're a peasant, right? You're having arrows raining down on you. Your mate's dead who you've known all your life. You're going to be in shock. So these are not, lots of these people are not battle conditioned soldiers, and they are just going to die anyway. Yes. So that should answer that one. Right. So Goff, anything quick?
Yeah. How do they manage to get everybody together? What's logistically to get all these people together from either side and get them up there and decide where it's going to be? I mean, how did that happen?
Well, to be honest with you, this is what the historians are saying. The historians said, well, if you reduce the figure from 100,000 to 50,000 and you say that there was 20,000 dead, then again, 20,000 dead's a hell of a lot, 50,000 is a hell of a lot. I think the main thing is these armies were put together quite quickly. Because if you have a standing army having to supply them over even a period of a week, you're not going to be able to sustain them. It's likely that the Henry would have marched into York and the surrounding area saying, we're raising an army. It would have been quickly put together in the space of a week. The Yorkists would have done the same. They would have wanted to have achieved action straight away to get this over and done with. It is likely that this whole thing was put together in the case of a week. You could not sustain an army like that. It's just not possible. It's impossible. Even today, we've seen it today with the pandemic. Food supplies running out really quick, and that's with modern supermarkets. We ran out of food within a week.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And most of these people would have brought their own food along as well. They wouldn't have been. There was no quartermaster. There was no. Right, you're going to have these rations. Most of these people would have only had the food that they carried with them, thinking that the battle was going to be over and done with within days. That's the situation. So we're going to open Sue's mic if Terry and Sue would like to say anything quick, because I want a break. We've undone your mic, Sue. Anything you want to say? We've unmuted you. Anything you would like to say, Jim?
No, I've answered the question. Yes.
Okay, we've answered your question. Anything you would like to say, Karen? We've unmuted you guys.
No, she's still muted.
But they need to unmute themselves. Right, Karen, quickly. Kathy, say something.
Yeah, no questions.
Can you ask them why we can't say anything then?
I can hear you now.
Oh, Jim and Chris want to say something, but you haven't unmuted them.
I just done it. Go for it.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Speak.
No, it's gone again.
Right. Right, unmute yours, Karen. Right. No. Oh. Right. It's not going well there. It's not going well. They've got two computers. Right, okay then. Write down your questions and do it over after the break. We will be back. Right, okay. We'll speak to you soon, folks.
All right, coffee break.
Right.